Good evening, everyone. My name is Brittany Kerfoot, the Deputy Director of Events at Politics and Prose, and I'd like to welcome all of you here to PNP Live. At any time during tonight's event, you can click on the green button below to purchase tonight's book straight from PNP's website. And a reminder that we're offering $5 flat rate shipping on all orders, so no matter how many things you add to your cart, you'll pay the same price for shipping. And if you live in the DC area, you can do curbside pickup at any of our 3 store locations at no additional cost. You can also ask either of our speakers a question tonight by clicking on Ask a Question, which is also at the bottom of your screen. And it looks like we already have a lot of questions. I'm so proud of you guys. That's amazing. So read through the questions that are already there before you submit what you want to ask, and you can vote for the ones that you want to see answered the most. We'd also like to thank our partners in this event, Girls Night In, as The Art of Showing Up is actually their June book club fair. G&I believes that taking a break and cultivating friendships is a crucial part of what wellness means for people, and that reading is an integral part of that. You can find out more about them on their website, girlsnightinclub.com, or on their amazing Instagram, Girls Night In. Finally, and most importantly, I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight, especially on a momentous day like Juneteenth. Today marks the oldest nationally celebrated commemoration of the ending of slavery in the United States. And in a time when this country's plague of racism, inequality, and violence against Black people is more evident than ever, Juneteenth holds a special significance this year. And we are honored to host tonight's guests on this day of celebration, but also reflection. So it is now my absolute pleasure to introduce tonight's 2 speakers. First, Rachel Wilkerson Miller is the deputy editor of Vice Life and the author of Dot Journaling, A Practical Guide. Her new book, The Art of Showing Up, How to Be There for Yourself and Your People, is part manifesto, part guidebook that leads readers to kinder, more thoughtful, and more fulfilling relationships. Moderating tonight's conversation is Brittany Luse, producer and host of the Nod podcast. In her spare time, which I'm sure she has so much of, she co-hosts Four Colored Nerds, an independent podcast about race, news, and pop culture. So now it is my pleasure to welcome to PNP Live, Rachel and Brittany.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Hello. We're here.
We're here.
We are here. So Rachel, for those of y'all who don't know, I interviewed Rachel on the podcast version of The Nod last year, and we talked about just her entire body of work because I knew that this book was coming. I have been waiting to talk with you about this book since last summer, so I'm so excited to get into this.
That was great. It must have been like a year ago. I think it was last
year ago.
Yeah,
I think it was a year ago.
Yep.
All right, so I want to get down to business.
Yep.
Let's start with the title of the book. It is called, it actually matches my home. I'm really happy about that. The Art of Showing Up. What does showing up mean to you?
So for me, it's one of those things that can be hard to describe, but you know when you see it. I think it's about really seeing things and being present. So, and this can apply to yourself or to other people. So like really bearing witness to what's happening around you and naming what's happening and then responding accordingly. So it means like for other people, it means bearing witness to what they're going through, identifying it, sort of responding to it in whatever way they need in that moment. For yourself, it's actually pretty similar. It's keeping an eye on yourself and saying, what am I going through right now? Mm-hmm. How do I make space for this? How do I honor this? How do I, respond to this in a way that I feel affirmed and whole and seen?
Mm-hmm. So, showing up, I think has been an important part of your work for some time. Even before, I'm not even sure if you always called it that, but
I don't think I think the name came later.
Yeah. But so much of your work has been around almost like these guides, how-tos, also sometimes personal essays and suggestions from your own life, where you are giving people tips on how to show up for themselves and also how to show up for other people. A couple articles of yours come to mind: how to cancel a friend without looking like a jerk, how to tell people you're going through a rough time. How did showing up become so important to you personally?
I think that it, like you said, it has always been sort of an underlying through line in my work, but I hadn't necessarily called it that or been able to sort of capture what it was that I was sort of angling for or motivated by. It wasn't until like, let's see, it would have been 2015, 2016, I went through a really tough time that ultimately led to my divorce, that it sort of crystallized in this way that I was doing this work about all kinds of topics, just could be, you know, stuff about cleaning your house, but it all sort of came together and crystallized as like, this is what it is. It's about taking care of yourself so that you can also take care of other people. And the way those two things are really, really tied together. But that was a time where just, I needed to be showing up. I needed to be calling on the things that I had sort of learned and stored away over the years without realizing why. That was the moment where I had to like put it all together and put it into practice. And also that was the moment where other people were doing the same thing for me and I was able to like rely on them. So that was when it really, really clicked.
It's interesting because like I could see how like, you know, like it's got this beautiful cover that's so pleasing and so joyous. But when you read the book itself, it does seem really informed. It's like, it's not so much about like, it's definitely a book about friendship and the beauty of friendship. But it's also a book that feels really informed by understanding what it means to go through a hard time.
Definitely. I think that if you haven't gone through a hard time yet in your life, you surely will. I think everyone is dealing with that. That's just a part of being a person in the world, especially in your 20s and 30s, 40s and beyond. And if it's not happening to you, it's happening to a friend. And so that's why these things are very related. And sort of the second half of the book is mirroring the first half, because a lot of the advice is ultimately the same. It's checking in on yourself to say, have I eaten today? It's also checking in on your friend when they're going through a tough time to say, have you eaten today? So a lot of it actually just rolls over. But there are sort of differences and ways of thinking about it. And I think just ultimately, you can't do the second part. You can't show up for your friends until you're really right with yourself and have a strong understanding of what it is that you need. And in doing that, you're able to be more compassionate, more generous, more kind, and more available ultimately.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because the book is divided. It's called The Art of Showing Up, but it's divided, you know, on friendship in the age of flakiness, right? Which we're going to come back to when we talk about the second half of the book. The first half of the book is incredible and so needed right now. The second half of the book, can I curse? I don't know if that's like available here. It's not like I won't.
Yes, you can.
Okay, cool. The second half of the book fucked me up. Like, seriously, I felt like so at points affirmed and read. We're going to get there. So the thing that I love about this book is that it is divided up into two sections, because like you say, it is so important to learn to show up for yourself before you show up for other people. Like you can't, like we were talking the other day, I want to say, and you said something about like people understand the idea of like, okay, like on a plane, you have to secure your mask before securing the person next to you. But it's so much harder, I think, to live that and to discern when you need to do that in real life.
Totally. I think it's very easy to think of that as sort of theoretical or something that applies to other people who are not you. And I mean, I'm guilty of this too. I just have to constantly remind myself, and I've gotten better at it. And I think the more you do it, the more it becomes habit. But it's very easy to make excuses, particularly when you're somebody who cares about other people, which if you're reading this book, you likely are. And I think most people are that way. So when in your nature to be a giver, to be a carer, to be of service to others, it's so easy to just say like, well, I can't possibly, I hear you, but like not right now, or we'll get to me later.
Yeah.
You can do that for a little while, but you can't do it for very long. And if you're doing it, I think you need to be really aware of like why you're doing it, and sort of have a time limit on it of like, I have to do this for the next 2 weeks, but then after that, I'm like back to focusing on myself or whatever. Cause it's so easy to just fall into that rut for months or even years. Yeah.
There's one section of the book that I told you before we started this, that I wanted to talk about. We didn't really get to dig into it when I talked to you a year ago, but I was hoping to see it show up in the book, and it did in a really interesting way. Just to that end of like being so focused on others' needs or obligations that you have to the outside world that you sort of neglect yourself. There is a section in the book called Going Pee. Like, why is going pee so important? And why did you have an entire headline section of the book with that title?
Well, I felt so strongly that like, if we're talking about basic needs, this is one of them. Like we can't talk about showing up for your body, which is the entire chapter, without talking about that, because I think it's such an easy one to neglect. And I know I do this because I'm just like, this is annoying. Who has the time? And I'm just doing something else and I don't want to bother with it. I find it annoying. But I think that there's something about like, if you're getting used to showing up for your body, this is a really simple way to like, this is a really easy entry point, or maybe not easy entry point, but it's a really common entry point. Like it's going to come up multiple times a day that you need to, here's like a basic signal. I think the term listening to your body can often be sort of fuzzy and sort of soft. And like, this is literally like your body is saying, do this thing. Can you listen to it? Can you do this thing? And the more I talked to other people about it, the more it became obvious that like, this is actually a thing that people put off for many reasons all the time. And I don't know if I should share the anecdote that's in the book. That is one of my favorites, but it's about somebody who put it off for too long and just peed herself in front of everyone because she didn't think she could take a bathroom break in that particular scenario.
Yeah.
And it's so, and she said to me, she was like, at the time I felt like, wow, look at me go. Like I'm multitasking. I'm peeing in front of a class that I'm teaching behind a podium. But then she was like, in hindsight, maybe that wasn't the most empowering move to be proud of myself for no one finding out that I pissed myself in front of a classroom full of students.
Yeah.
Learning Photoshop. So at a base level, go pee.
Yeah, no, I was just telling you that one of the things that has been so I mean, and I imagine that a lot of people who are watching today and even people who aren't watching today are dealing with this. More of us are spending more time at home than we have in a while. Even if you work outside the home, there aren't in many states in the United States and other parts of the world, there aren't a whole bunch of places you can go.
Right.
Even in your time off. So many of us are spending more time at home. And without sort of some of that external stimuli, I think I realized, at least for me, how much I depended on when my coworkers were eating lunch. Did I have time in between a meeting? Like I would, instead of being like, oh, I have to pee, I can get up and do that. I'm like, well, if I leave in the middle of the meeting, someone might get offended. It's like, everyone has to pee. Like, why?
Right.
Why would they get, and if they did, that's a them problem.
Very much a them problem.
Yeah. But I was so caught up in like, depending on outside things, and and it's still a battle, but you had so much in the book that was so helpful to me about like listening to my body. Is that something that always came easily to you, or did you have to learn it?
No, not by any means. I mean, I think it's still something that I struggle with. I think that's one example, but I've been struggling with working from home. I think every day I'm just sort of like, so lunch, huh? Like we're doing this again. Like I have to figure this out again because I just find it so tedious. And I've actually been pretty reliant. I have an alarm on my phone that goes off every day at 12:15 that says, don't forget to eat lunch, because it's not always easy to remember to stop what you're doing. And there aren't those cues. And it is easy to just like wake up and start working and not have a routine or stick with it. So having a routine helps a lot, but in the absence of a routine that you've been in for the past few years or however long it might be, I think you've got to really like push through and do more to create that. And that's definitely been the case for me since we've been indoors.
You also have a lot of very straightforward ideas and suggestions. I hesitate to say tips because I feel like the tone of the book is so like take the best and leave the rest. Like whatever works for you, like take it if it's useful.
Like take it or leave it. It's your life. Yeah. These are here's some thoughts. Like you can, But you have so many really practical ideas around like how to assess and maintain your time, your money, your energy stores and needs. It's not like, you have like, it's not like, you can, there's like, oh, type in this to get your budget spreadsheet or something like that. It's not quite like that, but so much of the information in the sections about caring for yourself is practical, which is, I think, runs counter sometimes to the, storied idea of self-care that so many of us are used to seeing in out in the world and in the media and on Instagram. Why was it so important for you to have those types of really practical pieces of information in the book? I think I get really frustrated when I read things that are not practical, that they give tips that are simply not practical, or they say things that are like, that don't have, that I'm like, okay, cool. But like, how do I actually apply this to my life? And so and this goes for all my work, I'm thinking about how can I create a framework that I think that with the more concrete tips coupled with sort of the understanding that like you don't have to do it exactly like I'm suggesting it, even though these are sort of concrete, it helps people say like, oh, I see what she's saying. I'm not going to do that exact thing, but I can do a version of that thing that makes sense for me. And I think that is hopefully helpful to people. That I find that the most helpful when I'm reading things, that like when something doesn't apply to my life exactly, but it allows me to think of how I could have like adapted to apply for my life. I'm like, oh, thank you so much. Like this is what I needed. And so that's what I'm trying to bring to people too. Just like, here, if I give you 5 suggestions and none of them stick, maybe you'll be able to come up with a 6th one, and then I will have done my job.
I love that approach because it feels really different, I think, than I guess the commonly held ideas around like service journalism and how-to guides. It's like this book doesn't, I mean, even though it does say how to be there for yourself and your people, like I said, it doesn't feel prescriptive at all. It feels like more of like gentle suggestions that you can come back to when you need them. And like, maybe, like you said, you can build your own routines or foundations from there.
Yeah, that's always the goal. So I'm glad to hear you say that, because I always hear that I'm like, this is just that, a gentle suggestion. If it's helpful, great. If it's not, that's fine too. I'm not going to be mad. Like there's very few things that I'm like, this way, and there's no room for nuance. Like I don't find that personally helpful. And I think most people don't either. So my hope is that that I try to over communicate, like, no, really, like do what you want to do. It's your life. I don't know your life. But so yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that is coming through.
So the second half of the book is all about showing up for your people, showing up for, it could be anybody from your partner, best friends, your loved ones, family, coworkers, your community, essentially. And I have to admit, that's the half of the book that I struggled the most with. I think I realized, the first half of the book, I'm like, okay, I knew that I was failing myself. There are many ways in which I knew that I was failing myself. Not sleeping enough, not eating enough vegetables, like, wasting my own time, doom scrolling. I knew I was failing myself. But reading the second half of the book, and really, it's really about how to just be a good and conscientious fellow citizen. When it comes down to it, regardless of the relationship that you have with you and the other person who you're interacting with, just like how to be a good person when you show up. Also, I'd say it takes it even a step further. This idea of showing up and really, like, how do I put it? Just like having your shit together for other people and really being there for other people. Why do you think, like, I'll be honest, I have there's a lot of self-help books back here. There's a lot of self-help books back here. And I've read books about friendship, and this is something different. It's really more about, like, it's almost like, it felt like reading a guide on how to determine what your standards would be for how you want to show up in the world.
Yes, absolutely.
Talk to me more about that.
Yeah, I think that, I think you totally nailed it, that it's not just about friendship specifically. It's just sort of you in relation to others. And I think that's important, because the term friendship is, like, loosely defined, because it can include your family, it can include, like, loved ones, but also your coworkers who you see every single day are, like, also very important, even if you're not technically friends, but you have friendships with them. So I wanted to really kind of include all relationships, and then also think about group dynamics and sort of the bigger picture. Anyway, so I think, like, figuring out what you expect of yourself, what you can reasonably expect of others, what you can reasonably bring to others is really important, because we all sort of have something unique to contribute. We all have our own unique needs. So having a clear understanding of who you are and what you can offer, what you want to offer, how you see yourself as a friend, how you want to be treated, how you're willing to accept being treated. I think that is just so crucial to having any sort of meaningful connections with people, is also an understanding of, like, okay, here's my line of, like, I won't be treated this way, or I won't let you be treated this way if I see other people treating you this way. Because so much of what is difficult as we get older is figuring out, I mean, not even as we get older, I think our entire lives, it's difficult to figure out how much we're willing to accept from other people when they're treating us badly. I think that's a really common thing. Or even thinking, I think there's a lot of, like, am I in the wrong? Am I overreacting? Am I being silly when somebody is, like, very much treating you badly or making you feel bad? So I was really thinking about there's so much second guessing that happens. I wanted to sort of provide a framework for thinking when you're second guessing, here are some things you can go back to.
That's a really good point. That's true. I think so many people spend so much time. I think so much of self-help is sort of like how not to be the bad guy. But instead, I think that's a really good point. The second half of the book provides a lot of guidelines, sort of like, the kind of people that you probably want to be around behave this way. And if somebody is really not doing any of those things and also doing a bunch of other stuff that makes you feel bad, you probably shouldn't be around them. And additionally, a theme that comes up over and over and over again in the book, you have options to manage that called boundaries. Talk a little bit more about boundaries, because I feel like it's all up and through the second half.
Yeah, it is. I think that's what it comes back to. It's like there's no sort of hard and fast rules about what's acceptable and what's not. I mean, there are certainly some, right? There are certain, like, we all sort of agree on certain levels of, like, violence isn't okay and certain sorts of things aren't okay. But beyond that, it's actually fairly up to the individual to decide what they're okay with. And if you haven't really gone through the exercise of thinking about what am I okay with, it's not always obvious when somebody is pushing a boundary. And so that allows them to keep doing it, and you don't even sort of realize what's happening. You just have a sense of like, this is feeling weird for me, but I don't know why. And or maybe, like, again, that feeling of, am I overreacting or am I being too sensitive? So I having, like, again, the book talks a lot about naming things. And I think just naming something as a boundary and being able to identify, I met this person a couple times and didn't get a good vibe from them because they were attempting to push my boundaries in this way or that way, like, is such a helpful thing. And once you kind of unlock that, it becomes, I think, so much easier to move forward with relationships, because it's like there's so much power in naming things. And I think boundaries is a big one.
I think that is so beautifully put. And it makes me think about sort of the flip side of that, which is like how to be the kind of good friend that people want in their lives. There is an entire chapter 9, called When They're Going Through Hard Shit, meaning when your people are going through hard shit. And you give at least some sort of foundational general guideline for going through everything from a breakup, a divorce, to a serious illness, to or chronic illness, to the death of a friend, to when they come out. There are so many pieces of information, and just like there's so many ideas of how to engage with somebody in a way that's loving and conscientious that you cannot find in Emily Post. Like, it's basically like an etiquette guide for how to help people in your life through hard shit. Even dealing with something like, like how to deal with, a friend who is an addict, or a friend who's, experienced sexual assault. You don't have like an entire chapter dedicated to each of those things, but you have enough there that somebody who you can open the book up and be like, okay, here are some first steps that I can take.
Definitely.
Talk to me about that chapter and why you constructed it the way you did.
Yeah, so one thing I was thinking about as I was writing this is sort of like, how can I download things that I've been holding in over the years, because so much of my work is fragmented, right? Like, it appears at this place or that place, or I've read things this place and that place. Like, how can I put them in one place that is sort of easy reference? And so, I wrote an article in, I think, 2015 about what to do if a friend has a miscarriage. And like, that's buried deep in my old BuzzFeed author page that, like, would anyone ever see it? But I felt like there was so much valuable advice in there. I learned so much from writing it that, like, I wanted to get that in there. And there's so many other things that I felt like, what if these could all just be in one place? Because you don't learn this anywhere unless you go through it, or a friend goes through it, and you kind of learn as you go. But this isn't something you're taught in school. It's not really talked about. And so it was important to me to just say, like, how can I cover, right? Like, I couldn't do a whole chapter on every single thing, but how can I think through sort of all of the major crises that you might experience in your life, and try to give you just sort of a base level, here are some things to keep in mind. And even if you don't remember every single tip, remember that this book exists and you can refer back to it as a jumping off point. The other thought I was having is like, okay, well, what if for younger people who are reading this book, like high school students or college students, how can I be perhaps the first person who's saying, here's what to do if a friend gets sexually assaulted? Because that's unfortunately probably going to happen at some point. And so it was like really a big responsibility, but also, you know, something I took really seriously, to be able to be the person who was like, well, let's start with this. And, you know, how can I make sure that I get that right so that you can know what to do? And also that, you know, if that happens to you, this is what you can expect of other people and hope.
You know, the other thing I've been thinking a lot about with that section is so much of like the traditional Dear Abby or Emily posts, like those traditional etiquette guides, they're kind of about like what's the word I'm thinking of? Posturing and avoidance. It's like, oh, something's hairy, let me get away from it. Like if something's difficult, how do we navigate away from it? This book is really about engaging. And I think that the traditional way of thinking about difficult things is so much about avoidance. And also too, I mean, to get deeper with it, so many of the issues that you talk about in that section are areas where people don't have a lot of institutional support.
Right.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Not if you are in a situation where you may not have access to you know, a therapist or a great therapist or medication or insurance or a support group. You know, it's like you're giving like everyday people tools to be able to help the people that they care about deal with something when our society doesn't really provide the tools for them to feel supported.
Yeah, I think that there might be times in your life where your friends are all you have, or your family is all you have, and or you are all that other people have. And so that's a big task and a big responsibility, and it shouldn't be that way. But should that happen, how can you do your best in those moments? How can you sort of know where to start and then where and how to sort of ask for help? And I think there are some things in there that are very specifically like, you shouldn't be somebody's therapist. You shouldn't be their only, you know, you shouldn't try to stand in for a professional. So knowing sort of when to say, oh, this is too much for me. I can't necessarily help you in this way, but what I can do is help you find or fund the professional help that you might need to get through this. And that won't always be an option, but I think just having sort of a baseline of what normal should be, even if it doesn't apply to you right now, because like everything is so fucked. Like knowing like what we're aiming for. Yeah, you might not be able to work someplace where you're respected and where you get to take breaks because you have to pee, but like losing sight of the fact that you should be able to pee at your job is, I think, a really important thing when times get hard.
That's such a beautiful way to put it. Yeah, there's one more. It makes me think of another part of the second half of the book that I want to talk about. You had a section devoted to allyship. And, you know, right now in America, today even.
Literally today.
I mean, allyship is the buzzword. Everybody's trying to be an ally. Everybody's like, is it like a Sam's Club card? Do I have to pay a fee every year? Like, how do I get in? Yeah. Right. Like, how do I do it? But you obviously wrote this book in the past. I thought that was so refreshing to see how to be a good ally. Why was it important for you to include that in the book?
I mean, it was important to me because so many people either don't know that they need to do this, and I wanted to tell them, or know that they do, but feel a bit lost and adrift. And so I wanted to help provide guidelines there too. But we like can't talk about showing up for other people without talking about allyship, which is showing up for marginalized people. Like if this book didn't cover that, I would have fundamentally failed, I think. So for me, it was just like, this is why we're doing this. Like, it's good to show up for your friends, but like ultimately, let's think even more outward. Like, we should be showing up for everybody to the extent that we can, as much as possible. And so I think like, it's great to think about yourself, and it's great to think about the people immediately around you, but like, let's continue to think bigger and think more outward. I think that's just a really important thing. So yeah, I barely got into it, right? Like, I think I have like, 8 to 10 points in there, which is, we're realizing this week, like there's so much to allyship that I couldn't even get into. This was like a very just like, how can I share this?
Yeah, it could be its own book.
It truly could. But this was just, so much of this book was like, I'm going to give you the first things, and then you can build on this from there. But like, here are sort of the things that I think are, my best advice, or the most important thing, or the things that have been most helpful to me personally. Or to my friends. So yeah, I just felt like this had to be in there.
To that point, I think it goes without saying, this is an intense time, between COVID-19, all the grief and isolation that has come with that, state-sanctioned violence against Black people and the uprisings that have followed, a global economic crisis, where many people are out of work, not by choice, and don't know when or how they're going to return. We have an intense election year in the United States, and there's, of course, continued violence against LGBTQ people, from the state and also from, civilians and their peers and their communities. The world that we are living in now, I think, feels to many of us very different than the one that you likely wrote the book in.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how you hope people engage with your book in the world we're living in now.
Well, I think, like you said, it feels very different, but it ultimately is not so different. And then I think a lot of the things that were happening a year ago or 3 years ago are sort of just taken to an extreme or to sort of even a logical extension.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was writing this, I tried to future-proof it as much as I could and think like what's going to be helpful in a year and 5 years even. Mm-hmm. But I also was thinking what has happened over the past 5 years. Like so much of this I was pulling from my time at BuzzFeed, and I was there during the election. I was there the summer before, or the summer of 2016, when it was a really rough summer. There was the Pulse shooting, and there were so many Black people were murdered that summer. It was just really, really rough.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, this is like, we've been through this before. It just feels a bit different now. It actually feels to me a bit better now. Obviously, we've never been through something like the pandemic, but in general, a lot of this stuff is just, it keeps coming up. And so I'm happy that I could be helpful with things that are continuing to come up, but I also wish that they were, I think I even said this in the book, but I hope you will never need a lot of these things. I wish this book weren't relevant right now, but I'm also glad that I can provide something helpful in a bad time. But I would much rather it just sort of be irrelevant. I wish it weren't necessary.
Beautifully put. Well, I think it's time to open up to the audience for some questions. So this question is from Aaron. This is a really good one. I would love to hear more about setting boundaries within the pandemic. How do we better communicate to our loved ones about health boundaries, i.e. what we feel comfortable with, especially as states open up?
This has been one of the most talked about things, I feel like, in my team at work. And sort of the question I'm getting from so many people kind of via either text messages or in my inbox is how do I tell people, I'm not comfortable with what they're doing or not doing, or whatever the case may be. I think this is one thing where you've just got to be confident and firm. This is the most basic. It's showing up for your body and for other people. So if we're talking about something like wearing a mask, and you believe in wearing a mask, and I personally am I'm very pro-mask and staying in, and I will probably be several months behind what the opening up guidelines say. I'm glad the restaurants are opening up, I guess, but I'm not personally going to be in one anytime soon. I think this is where it's you got to draw on all of the stuff that is kind of in the book about knowing your values. It's not really necessarily a debate, at least in terms of what you're doing. When it gets into what other people are doing, that's a different story. But I think for yourself, you should be confident that you're not the only one who feels the need to play it safe. You're not alone. And even if other people are giving you a hard time about it, they're in the wrong. They're wrong. So you should feel confident in doing what it takes to protect your body. That's the most basic thing. So if you set a boundary around anything, I think this is one of those things. And I think the way to do it is to just be firm about it, but also not be overly stressed about it, because in some ways it's not that deep. Wearing a mask is sort of like wearing a seatbelt in a car. That you put a seatbelt on, and something was like, "Hey, wearing a seatbelt. What's wrong with you?" I think most of them sort of be like, "What's wrong? What? Well, why is this even a discussion?" Of course I'm wearing my seatbelt. I think sort of not getting too emotionally invested in other people's opinions of something like this, because their opinions about you wearing a mask has nothing to do with you. Ultimately, they're sort of putting some stuff on you that's not really your problem, and just I don't know. I feel like just this is. Find a way to sort of keep if people are giving you a hard time about it, and just kind of I'm good. This is where I am. And if they keep pushing it, I think you can put it back on them and say why does it bother you so much that I want to wear a mask? Or why does it bother you so much that I'm not willing to go to a restaurant? ask, because there's something going on with them, and I think you can push them a little bit to, if they won't let it go.
Another really good question. This is from Paula. You wrote in your acknowledgments that this book was originally twice as long. She has a very cute emoji in there. That's like, ah. But there's a smile. Looking back, what is a section you wish had stayed in or that you would have expanded on more?
That's a great question. It's hard to remember at this point. Everything got cut. That got cut because so much got cut. I'm sure if Bati, my editor, is on the call, she would probably have some better insight into this because she was the trooper who helped cut so much. I had put a lot of things that I had written in past BuzzFeed posts, like some variation that I had put those in there. And so those were kind of the first things to go because it was like, well, these already exist. And like, are they really relevant here?
Yeah.
I think we probably cut, I had written about my feeling sad in the summer. I think we may have cut quite a bit of that. And that's an essay I had written before, but I think about that this time of year because I think it's easy to feel really, really down this time of year and also feel embarrassed because everyone's like, oh, it's summer, best time of year. And if you're somebody who gets sort of reverse seasonal affective disorder, it can be really rough. So that's something I might have liked to talk about more. We also, I had written this piece for BuzzFeed about having a dress code and how that was so foundational to sort of my sense of self in my life. And that got pared down to like 3 paragraphs that had been the entire piece originally. And I think that's what I would have loved to have in there more than anything, but also like exists on the internet. So anyone can find it if they want to.
So this is a really good question. I'd appreciate, this is from Nilu, and they're saying, I'd appreciate tips you have for making good friends, especially in these challenging times. There's a winky face.
I think thinking about what you're looking for in a friend right now or ever is always a good place to start. So are you looking for a few really close friends? Are you looking for a new best friend? Are you looking for somebody to just go do things around town with, but maybe like not super, like you have a spouse who fulfills part of that for you. So you're just looking for some more company and more people with your interests. So just getting a sense of what you're looking for. Also getting a sense of what you can really offer people right now. So if you are super focused on your career or your family or your own health, like you might not have as much to bring to friendship. So thinking through like, what can I bring? How much time can I really devote to this right now is a good place to start. And then I think one thing I've kind of come around to in the past couple of years is I think it's good to like hone in a little bit, and instead of like making plans with a different person every single weekend because you're trying to make new friends, like being really consistent with a few people who you think you have the most potential. I think sort of just focusing in on these 3 people, or even like these 3 old friends who I haven't talked to in a while, but who I really like, or these sort of casual acquaintances who I feel like there's potential there. Those are the people I'm going to focus in on. But I think if you sort of stretch yourself really thin and sort of scatter your efforts around, it can be harder to make those connections. But I think if you kind of dedicate yourself to like, I'm going to court a few friends and I'm going to do it in an intentional way. I'm going to check in with them once a week. I'm going to keep trying to make plans with them. I think you'll have more success. But then also be willing to cut your losses if you're doing that and you're like, you know what, this ain't it. Like, I'm not feeling this. They're not feeling me.
Yeah.
Miss here. Like, it's okay to give up and walk away and say like, all right, I tried, but I think they're never going to be my close friend, but I'm glad that I got to know them and that was lovely. And I'm going to move on now.
I have a follow-up to that. So, I'm glad that this person brought up these times. I know that I'm finding it challenging to keep up with all people who are already my friends.
Yeah.
Like even I usually call up my very best friends, my parents, every single day. And now I've gotten to the point where I talk to them maybe twice a week. It's just between work and being angry about everything and tired. But yeah, I'm wondering, like, do you have any tips that you would think, I guess, especially for these times, on how to be better about keeping up with like your loved ones during this time?
It's hard. I think it's like you. I'm like, I have all this time, but I'm also very overwhelmed by everything, and it's hard. So I think always a fan of like regular hangouts and regular check-ins and figuring out the best way to stay in touch with people. I think one thing that can be helpful is to do a big catch up with people who you haven't caught up with in a while. So then you can just do like a 15-minute phone call instead of a 2-hour phone call, like getting or these don't have to be really long, intense conversations, that they can just be sort of fun and light. I mean, this is like what high school was like. And I'm like, how do we get minutes and then be like, all right, I gotta go, and just fine with that, and you move on. I think that is a good thing to try to cultivate right now. So I think that's one thing. And then the other thing is really making sure that the people you are making time for are the people you want to be making time for. It's hard right now because it feels like everybody needs help and everybody needs support, but it's a good time to examine, okay, are these 3, friends Slacks that I'm in really doing it for me? Or is this club that I'm in or group that I meet online with really doing it for me? Are there ways that I'm wasting my time that I feel better if I spent them on friends? And the answer might be no. Like, you might find that, watching 6 hours of reality TV is like really helpful and you need to just zone out for a bit, and talking to people isn't it right now, but just taking a look at the big picture and saying, where do I have time for this? What's my capacity, and am I there, and how can I make arrangements? Knowing that you can't be that close with that many people ultimately.
So key. All right. This is a question that just popped up, but I am really curious about actually myself. This is from Taylor. Taylor says, creating the habit of showing up for myself before others is hard. All caps. I am in the process of a 30-day plan to stop using the internet and my phone so much and spend more time outside, but I'm scared my efforts to show up for myself aren't going to last. How do you create lasting ways to show up for yourself and check in that you're on track along the way?
Well, I think that a 30-day plan is great, or even 21 days. I think that's sort of the accepted habit. So committing is great and makes a big difference. I think the other thing is to lower your effort and expectations a tiny bit. So sometimes, like, you know yourself best. If like a hardcore 30-day no internet is going to be the thing that like helps you snap out of it, or if you're going to get to the end of that and be like, that was terrible, I'm never doing it again, I should have done this more in moderation. So thinking about, I in my past have been really all or nothing, and I know a lot of people tend to fall into that, particular people who are like perfectionists or overachievers. You're like, I got to do 100 with it, and then you get to the end of it, you're exhausted. So thinking about like, what is realistic, and instead of starting with the most intense version, think about starting with the lowest intensity version, and just say like, I'm going to sign off, or I'm going to shut my phone off at 9 every night and not get on it until 9 every morning. Like, just a tiny boundary that allows you to like slowly expand might be more helpful for sort of building up that muscle and sticking with it versus like the more intense version.
That's really good. That's really, really good. I actually think it makes me think of another question. This is from, I hope I do not mispronounce your name. I believe it could be Risha. Oh, wait, where did it go? Did I lose it? Did I lose the question? Oh, here we go. Okay. No, just the best interface. It's good, but I'm daffy. Okay. So this is from, I think, Risha, Richa. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. They're saying, I struggled reading and doing the work at the same time. How would you recommend diving into this book?
So I really recommend reading and not trying to do the work at the same time, like really just sitting with it, which I know is hard. That is work in itself. But I think, again, if you're very sort of all or nothing and can tend to just be like, okay, this is it, I got this, I'm going to go right in. Like, it's so easy to kind of lose steam. So I think like just sitting with it and thinking about like, how do I feel about that? A couple of days later, what's sticking out to me is the things that I really want to tackle first. Like, you can't do everything in this book all at once. Like, I certainly didn't. This is a book that sort of captures years of different types of things. It's not going to happen all at once. It's not going to happen in the summer. So just sit with it and think about like, okay, what are my actual priorities right now? Which aspect of this do I want to start with? And do that for a little while. And then if you're feeling good about that, like, do something else. But I'm a big fan of just like small things, thinking small. I think if you're the type of person who wants to do so much, it can just be really hard to think small. But that has been one of the things that's helped me the most, is just to rein it in a bit and not try to do everything or be everything all at once.
Speaking of not doing everything or being everything all at once, I have a question from someone named Jesse. Jesse is asking, and I think this is a really good question. How do you tell a friend who is struggling compassionately that they should see professional help, i.e. see a therapist?
I think that's really, really sensitive. And I actually interviewed a therapist for Ryan Howes when I was working on this. And he was saying like, this was sort of about venting broadly speaking, but he was like, oh, you can just say something as soon as you get bored. And I was just like, what? I thought it was going to be like this intense, like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, I could use a minute to have a break and blah, blah. And he was like, no, just like, you can tell them like you're having trouble focusing and you can kind of like, you need to change the subject. And I was really surprised by that. But I think similarly, I think you can say to a friend, I think if you're having repeated conversations that are sort of similar, you can say, and this comes from Ryan specifically, say like, I'm not sure what to say to help you at this point. Like, I'm not sure I can be super helpful in this moment because I've sort of given you all my advice on this and I don't know the best thing to do. I don't know what's going to help you right now. Like, have you thought about talking to a therapist about this, or have you thought about talking to a counselor about it? And it's hard to say that. People can get defensive about it. If you get the sense that they might be responsive, if you say like, I'm happy to help you find somebody, and if you're up for doing that, if it's a close friend, that might be a good move. But yeah, he really reassured me that it's okay to encourage people to seek therapy, particularly if they're dealing with something really intense. There's lots of like big life things that are go to therapy moments. And so I think those people tend to be a little bit more receptive in those moments in general, but I think it's okay overall to say, I think you could probably use some support that like, I don't think I can do the job that you need right now. Let's find somebody who can.
Yeah, that's like totally different than like, you should see a therapist. It's like saying like, I want you to be well. Right. I want you to be able to talk to somebody who can help you with this.
Right.
And a type of person who can help you with this is somebody who has possibly, years and years of training at being able to help people who are dealing with some of the things you're dealing with or feeling the feelings you're feeling, helping them to feel better.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so this one is this one's from the Girls Night In team. One way the Girls Night In community shows up for each other is through book clubs and discussions. Do you have any tips for friends on how to build a standing activity centered around mutual interests, whether it's books, crafting, or anything else? How do we normalize bringing structure like this into adult friendships without it feeling like a work meeting? I have to say, I am in a couple of clubs. I haven't shown up all the time because I've had to work a lot recently, so I haven't been able to even keep up with Zooms. But I enjoy having stuff like that in my adult life. It's like nice to have that sort of standing activity. But yeah, how do we normalize bringing that kind of standing meeting into our personal lives without it feeling like work?
Well, I think you just do it and see what people say. In my experience, everyone's been super responsive to that. When I say like, why don't we just make this a recurring hangout? Everyone's like, great idea. Let me get out my calendar right now. I think we can sort of recognize where structure is helpful and where it's limiting. And in a lot of ways, having that structure in place, like gives you the freedom to actually do the fun stuff. Like not negotiating when and where you're going to meet, like having that like locked in and set at the beginning, like allows like having to figure that part out is what makes it feel like work, but then it's done and then you don't have to do it again. And that feels so much better. So I think being a little bit more comfortable with just saying like, yeah, I think actually it'd be better if we just put this on the calendar and trust that most people are actually going to be fairly responsive to that. I mean, I think having an agenda for friend hangouts is not the worst idea in the world. So I think I'm a little bit more on the like work meetings are okay. I think again, like I think structure and giving things thought in advance implies I care about you. I want us to have a good time together. Let's go into this hangout knowing why we're doing it so that we can get the most out of it. Like even just saying we're going to have a group hangout on Saturday night and this is the topic we're going to discuss, or like just like a little bit of structure that actually makes it more fun, less anxiety inducing, because it's like, well, what are we going to talk about? What am I going to do? You can kind of answer that question for people. So I think thinking of structure and a purpose for getting together as a kindness versus a burden, and a kindness versus a burden can help a lot.
I have a follow-up to that. That's kind of like a reverse question. I'm going to sit back now because I'm just talking. So I'm wondering, how does that work with people? What about people whose schedules are incompatible? So like, let's say like when one friend is somebody who has like a more like a less traditional schedule. So they have more pockets of free time maybe than most people typically do. Or maybe even like you have a friend who's like underemployed right now or in between projects or something like that. And then you have another friend who is somebody who like doesn't have a lot of time, whether it's because of children, caring for, like family or something like that. or it could even just be because of work, and they prefer for things to be scheduled. How do you negotiate those different time needs between friends when both people are interested and invested in keeping the relationship going, but they have incompatible urges, I guess, when it comes to, or incompatible desires when it comes to how to keep up?
I think the first thing is that it's just good to talk about it, to make sure that you've both sort of acknowledged, here's why I keep saying no, or here's why I've been frustrated that we haven't, like, here's why this is sort of feeling off right now, so that you can say to each other, I really want to see you. I really do want to hang out with you. But when you call me at the last minute, like, I have a new baby, I'm never going to be able to do that. Like, just having an open conversation about it that's not accusatory, that like allows you to both just work on a solution together. The other thing is, if you've had that conversation, you can assume good intention. So if your friend like has a ton of free time and they're super spontaneous and they're calling you and you say, no, I can't hang out, like, don't necessarily get frustrated with them for asking. And like, the agreement on their end needs to be, they're not going to get frustrated with you for saying no. Kind of like, if you get on the same page, like, I'm going to keep asking on the off chance that you can do this. And like, maybe one time you can, and that's how you can kind of compromise if that seems likely. But figuring out sort of what could it look like if we both agree to keep trying at it and try to be flexible. And you might have to say, like, I'm a planner, I love making plans, but you know what? My friend who has a new baby, like, they're going to call me at the last minute. And if it's a day that I could go, I'm not going to say no just to prove a point because I'm annoyed they called me last minute. Grateful that we're going to make it work today. And I'm going to go for it. And I think just staying loose and staying on your toes to make it work is really helpful.
That's really helpful. Cause I know I've been on either side of that. I've been the friend who's like, hey, what are you doing? My friend's like, right, girl. Like,
I think it's like about responding to the people who are like continuously saying like, no, I'm always going to be at work at this time. If you ask me this time, I'm never going to say yes. Like, if somebody's telling you that, you should listen, but at least try to have a conversation about like, okay, when is a better time? What's a better way to make this happen? You want to hang out together. If you're on, like, get on the same page about that and like be on the same team. And I think it'll go a lot better.
That's making me think of another question that's in here. And to be honest, I feel like I'm telling everyone all my business. To be honest, this is a place where I feel like I found myself a lot recently. And I don't think that I'm alone in that. I think so many of us have had like all of our daily lives. It's like if your daily life is in a cup that holds a lot of pencils. And then like the past few months, it's just like, let me shake all this out.
Yeah.
And you figure out the rest, right? I know that I don't think I'm alone in this. I've like not lost touch, but just fallen out of step with some of my friends. And so Jordan is asking, any tips for rekindling a friendship with an old friend, especially when you know you've kind of dropped the ball on showing up for them in the past?
I think if you know you've dropped the ball, you got to start by owning that and sort of start by approaching tentatively and coming from a place of real humility and saying like, hey, I know I haven't been around as much for the past 6 months or a year. If you've got a reason, not an excuse, but a reason, take responsibility for that and say like, I was really caught up in my relationship. That wasn't a great move on my part and I really regret it, but I would love to catch up with you if you have time in the next couple of weeks. If not, I totally understand. I hope you're doing well. And I always say like with something like that, kind of approach from a distance. So send an email versus a text, maybe set up a phone call, like give them a little bit of space to say yes or say no. Because with a text or a phone call, you're kind of like dropping that on them and they don't have any space to react to it and decide how they want to proceed. So depending on how you and this friend communicate, if you were always phone callers, then a text might make sense. But figuring out how can I give them a little bit of space to really think about this, whether they want to pick things up again. But I think, it's always worth a shot. If they say no, like that's okay too. Don't bug them about it. But like, yeah, I think just own the things you wish you had done differently and then try to do better.
So simple, but it's hard to do in action. Okay. So this is an interesting question. This is from Stephanie. The book seems geared toward women. Even the cover is pink. It seems like men also have a lot of problems with showing up for themselves and others. How much of the book do you think applies to men?
All of it. Like truly, the cover of the book is one of, I think I did not choose the color palette. I love the cover, but I always tend towards something that feels more neutral, although like I don't know, if a man doesn't want to read a pink book, I'm sorry to hear that. But I feel really strongly about like all of my work being widely applicable and not just to women. It bums me out that men don't do more self-care, because I think we'd all be better off if men did a better job of getting right with themselves and being okay with being alone and being okay with making mistakes and that sort of thing. So I hope men will read it. I hope everyone will read it, because I think that even though there's certainly things in there that I was writing with marginalized people in mind, I don't think that men are excluded from that group, like broadly speaking. And so, I hope they'll read it and take good things from it. I hope everyone will.
So, this is a question just basically about you, actually, more so like how you got into this. It's from Ariana. A lot of your writing focuses on mental health, self-care, and lifestyle hacks. What drew you to focus on those topics at BuzzFeed, Vice, etc.?
It's a good question. I think that in general, I really love service journalism. So that was just basically reported or informed work that's teaching people how to do things better, how to live better. And over the past few years, we've seen there be more interest in mental health. That has just become an increasing conversation. So I'm excited to be a part of that and contribute to it. But I think even if I'm talking about something like, the best way to clean your home, that to me is still part of this bigger picture of just living a good life. I think for me, service is really at the core of all of it, of like, how can I be helpful? How can I answer questions? I'm that person who loves having a solution to a problem. Like if somebody asks a question on Slack, like I love having a solution or helping people find a solution. So that's sort of the core of my writing. And I get paid to like find answers for people ultimately, which I really like doing. That to me is like wonderful. I'm like, great, like let me just go. I'll go scour the internet to find the best thing or find out what doesn't work. Like I would love to just figure that out for you so you don't have to.
All right, now next question is from Kiana. This is, I think, something that a lot of people are thinking about right now. And I think a lot of people of color, especially Black people, feel, I think sometimes are trying to figure out how to navigate this or feel pressure to figure it out. Or maybe sometimes I had times where I was like, how come I don't know how to diversify my organization? It's like, oh, well, that's a job. That's actually a discipline. But Kiana asks, lots of companies have committed to supporting the Black Lives Matter movement and have said they're committing to hiring more Black employees. How do you hold your employer accountable now and in the future? Like, how do you do that?
Well, I think you just do it. You keep asking, you keep being the squeaky wheel. I mean, that's a lot of what I did at BuzzFeed, and a lot of other people eventually, or not eventually, but also joined in, but like eventually joined in. I think remembering that there's power in numbers, but that also people are scared, and sometimes you have to be the one. And it sucks when you're the only one and you're also the Black woman who's doing that. Like, and that's going to happen in my experience. But I think it's like the work is worth it. The risks are worth it. You can't always take them, but when you can, you should, because I definitely saw that there was definitely a time where I was the one, or I was one of 4 or 5. And, like 3 years later, that wasn't the case anymore. And that was really, really exciting to see, that people just need to see somebody else do it and do it confidently, because it makes them feel braver and more confident to do it too. And like, I think we've all been there when something happens and you're like, is anyone going to say anything? And it's like, nope. Okay. You got to do it. And then people will often join you. So be brave, be willing to be the one. And just, I've been saying this a lot lately, but like when companies say like, we care about this, or I'm really like, this is important to us, like take them at their word. Especially if they've said it publicly, and hold them accountable publicly, like you can point them back to the things that they've said. So if in 6 months, like the hiring practices haven't changed, or they still haven't done the things they're saying right now they're going to do, like ask at your next all hands. Like, you said you were going to do this thing. Where is it? Why hasn't it happened yet? Like, hold them accountable until they start holding themselves accountable. It makes a difference. It really does. I've seen it happen.
That's a really good point. Something else that I think a lot about with that too is, like at my last organization that I worked at, we frequently have these tense conversations about diversity, whether it's like asking to see the numbers. Are the numbers what you say they are? Like, right. who did you count? Right. Or who did you count? Something that I realized over the course of my time being there, it was the first time that I was actually ever in a leadership position. Before, I was always at the bottom of the ladder of whatever organization that I was at. And so I felt a lot of times like disempowered to speak up. And sometimes that was for good reason. Like my job wasn't going to be protected. And like, but I realized that as you sort of, for me, as I gained more power in the organization that I worked at, or I became more of a leader, and I had more protection, and I became to some degree more indispensable, I realized that like the higher up you get, it's like the more important that it is that you speak up, because there are going to be so many other people that you're working with who don't feel comfortable doing that. So as scary as it is for you, if you have like a little bit more comfort, maybe than you did a few years ago in your career, then take that risk. Like the more comfort that you're given in a material sense, and stability that you're given in that sense, then I think the greater imperative there is for you to say something.
Very completely. Yeah. It becomes more important, and it also gets a little bit easier, a little bit safer. And again, that depends on your company and your role and so many other things. But I think if you're a manager specifically and you have people looking to you as a leader, and even if you can't necessarily for whatever reason say something to the higher ups, like making sure you're saying something to your team and saying, I'm really sorry that this is happening. I want you to know that I am really disappointed in the company's response, and I'm going to stay on them, and just saying to the other people who are watching, yeah, I saw that too, and it wasn't okay with me.
So I want to do a time check. I don't know. I realized that it's 9:02 and I don't want to be in trouble.
You're not in trouble. Keep going.
I can keep going. Oh my God, this is great. Okay, this is amazing. So much like the show that I host a show now on Quibi like every day, well, Monday through Friday, called The Now with Brittany and Eric. It's like episodes are like 6 to 8 minutes long. Yeah, so it's always just like the clock is running out. You have 20 minutes to talk to someone and ask them about the traumatic experience that they had. So this is like this is luxurious. Oh, this is a great question from Sarah. How do you handle friendships that you feel like are no longer a good fit? I have several childhood friends in particular that I feel loyalty and love for from all the times we've shared, but I've been feeling like we're at different life stages and have grown to have vastly different worldviews as we've gotten older. When is it time to move on, even if you've known someone for a long time?
I think that knowing somebody for a long time does not mean you have to be friends with them forever. I think that is a nice thing, but I don't know if I would say it's overrated, but I think it requires some scrutiny that like there's definitely value in staying close to people who've known you for a while. But I don't know. I have new friends who I trust so deeply and I'm very close to that I feel such a stronger connection with than I do with people who I've known for longer. So I think you shouldn't feel guilty about the fact that you're wanting to maybe move on from people that you grew up with, particularly because so many of us grew up in like towns that we will never go back to, or that we feel really distant from. And we want to make friends who are more like us and who share our values and our worldview. So I think you shouldn't feel too guilty about that. I think from there, you can kind of decide, do I need to actually have a serious conversation about this and make it official? Or do I get the sense that they're feeling the same way? And we can sort of just like gently, slowly over time, keep in touch less, and sort of like a fade out can be really painful. So I think like be honest with yourself if they seem really invested and want to keep connecting with you. But if you're getting the sense that you're both just kind of ready to let things go, like that might be okay. But I also think if they're really just like still hitting you up and like clearly wanting to maintain the friendship, then it's important to be direct and say like, I'm so glad that I've had you in my life. I feel like we're in really different stages. How are you feeling? And get a sense of what they have to say and just talk about it. But it's okay to break up with a friend. Like it always is.
We have, speaking of relationships in general, a question from Jessica. How do you let go of hard feelings over a relationship with someone that didn't treat you well?
Ooh, that is a good question. I think I am reminded of this quote that sort of, how do you get through hard times? Like any way you can. I think you don't rush it. It can take a really long time. And I think only when it comes from sort of accepting the sort of lack of control that we have over these situations can you begin to sort of find peace with it. And you might never get closure and you might never be happy about it or feel good about it, but you can ultimately over time, and depending on the like depth of the relationship, it might take more time. You can over time start to like move on and sort of forgive yourself for the things that you feel like you wish you had done differently. Cause I think that can be a lot of it. But it can take a really long time. I don't think it happens overnight. So if it's if it's not been very long, like don't beat yourself up for not being there yet. Like be patient with yourself. And I think just kind of do the work of asking yourself, like, why am I still upset about it? And if you're upset, you're like, well, yeah, because it like ruined a year of my life and cost me like $30,000 in moving fees or whatever. Like you can be mad about that for a pretty long time. Like that's reasonable. But I think you never want to let something eat away at you so much that you're unable to move forward. And that's easier said than done. But I think kind of keeping an eye on it and seeing like, okay, when does it feel like it's costing me even more to stay mad? When it's time to sort of think like, okay, do I need to talk to a therapist? What do I need to do to feel right about this? And there's no one solution to it except like knowing that eventually you can get to a place of acceptance. So like you can still like get annoyed every time that person's name comes up, or get angry, like, but still accept that like, and be okay now.
So on that tip, there's a related question from Valerie. What's your advice? Well, it's related, but it's kind of a different situation. But it's similar about the breakup. This is from Valerie. What's your advice for showing up for yourself in the face of an incredibly amicable breakup? Asking for myself.
Nice. Well, if it's amicable, that implies sort of I think that implies you're feeling good about it. I could be mistaken, but if you're still feeling bummed about it, or I guess even if you're not, I think just making space to like honor it in some way. I think having some kind of ritual, whether that's like rearranging your furniture a little bit or buying yourself a pint of ice cream, even if you don't like need it, but because that's like a thing that is done at the end of breakups, like find a way to say like, I'm sad, or I'm this is bittersweet. I'm going to like honor it in XYZ official ways. I'm going to blast this breakup album and light a candle. And even if you don't cry about it, like still just do something to kind of mark the end of it for yourself. Like a little ritual just for yourself, I think could be helpful.
I really like that. I really, really like that. That's I think about like amicable. I mean, I have never had an amicable breakup. I think about it, but even I think about breakups of other kinds, whether it's like with a friend or even like leaving a job that like was like having something to mark that time just for you. That's really smart.
Yeah, just give yourself the weekend or whatever it is. And I think leaving a job is a really good example of something that like often is like you're happy to do it and you're excited about your new opportunity, but you still feel something. You feel a little wistfulness or just like this is ending. And I think just being like, oh, I need to sit with that in some way is a good place to start.
Okay, so this next question, this person didn't leave a name, but this is a great question. And I think a lot of people here tonight have this question. Is there a non-passive aggressive way to tell certain friends or family members to buy your book or give it to them, or at least preach your lessons in a non-preachy way? I love this question.
It's a great question. Well, I think the first half of the book is about showing up for yourself. So I think if you want to get somebody to read it, you can focus on that and say, I think that you never take care of yourself. You could be, you got to make time for yourself. This book is really helpful in that regard, which is true, I hope. And then maybe they'll keep reading to some of the other things. And is that passive aggressive? I'm not sure. But I think just being honest with people too, just like if you have a tough relationship with them, you can say like, this book was helpful for me in X, Y, and Z ways. Like you might find it helpful too. Again, it really depends on the relationship you have with people, but a gift without further comment too, oh, I heard this book recommended, thought you might like it, might also work. I don't know. Let me know if you do any of these things though.
Yeah, I almost gave this to someone for like as a birthday gift recently, and then I was like, maybe this isn't like a birthday gift for them. Maybe it's more of like a, hey, I saw this and thought of you type of gift. Yeah. Because like, yeah, it's sort of just like, hey, I've been reading this book and like, I think you might like it too. Maybe we could read it together or something like that.
Yeah. And even if you want to share things that you personally found helpful, that like, you can be a little bit vulnerable and say like, I found this really helpful. I like overall that like makes them maybe less defensive about it.
I definitely
don't give it to a friend who's just like an asshole. Talk to that friend about being an asshole.
I was just gonna say, I'm like, according to the book, you say you must be direct.
Yeah, you got to be direct about that.
So, Nilu asks, "Hi, I'm curious whether a certain person or situation prompted you to write this book."
Not really. It was just sort of because this was originally a BuzzFeed post, and it came out of like conversations that we had sort of had internally in our team, and conversations I had with friends, just like a oh, this seems like a thing that would be helpful for people. And the book itself became like a collection of things I had written over the years, putting them all in one place. So if anything, it was sort of like reaching a point in my career where I had written a lot of things and I wanted to collect them in one place, but not like specifically inspired by a certain situation. The book, I think, is a little bit too big for that too. There's I can't give credit to any one thing that inspired me.
Jameson is asking, I'm at a fork in the showing up for road. I have a good friend who's getting married and is having a bachelorette party. I'm not comfortable with going due to COVID, but the bride hasn't answered my calls, so we can talk it out. That sounds like a compound issue. What should I do? Jameson asks.
I think have you said why you're calling, or do they think you're just calling to catch up? If you haven't, and you haven't sort of given any indication you're calling to talk about this party, it might be good to send a text or an email or leave a voicemail. I know that's very old school, but just say like very specifically, I want to talk to you about this upcoming trip. Can you give me a call back this week? Like, so they sort of know what's coming. And so then if they are avoiding you, at least you'll sort of know that they're avoiding you, and you can feel a bit less guilty as the more time goes on. Like, you communicated to them, this is about your upcoming wedding plans. We need to talk about this. And then from there, I think like being really kind. I really feel for people who have wedding stuff going on right now, because that is just really unfortunate and really a bummer. So being kind about it, but also it's okay to just be like, yeah, I'm so sorry. Like, I really am just not comfortable with this. And if you're comfortable with it, you could say like, I'd love to figure out a way to make a virtual bachelorette party seem really great for you. Are you open to that? But if you get the sense that they're going to do it with or without you, then there's not much you can do.
That's a really good point. Something I canceled my wedding. I was supposed to get married next April, but it was going to be on an equestrian farm in the mountains of Puerto Rico. I was so excited. It's where my partner's from. It's a beautiful place. We just picked it in January. And actually, I felt guilty at first. We felt guilty at first canceling it, which is like, it's like our day. I hadn't thought about, even from the other point of view, we felt like we were letting people down by not having it. So it's interesting to hear, Jameson, from you, that you feel like you might be letting your friend down by not going to her bachelorette. And that may be, she may feel that way. I can't say, but I think that there's a possibility that on her end of things, she might also be feeling like a certain level of like guilt or sadness or disappointment, to Rachel's point, that like you might not even be thinking of. Honestly, I read your question and I was like, oh man, I wasn't even thinking about someone being disappointed about not being able to send to me. Oh, Jameson's giving an update. Oh. Jameson says, to clarify, I'm fully prepared to pay the $400 to $500 and not go, as to not ruin the other's trip. The bride and her bridesmaids haven't been socially distancing despite all being aware of the risks, which kind of goes back to the first question that we talked about.
I think this is actually a great move. We're talking about like failing on wedding plans in general, is always be like, offer to pay as much as you can, and offer to like be as generous as you can afford to be. So I think like the fact that you're offering to pay is a really big move. And to my mind, I'm like, that really goes a long way and is really thoughtful. So I think like making that part of it when you say like, I can't go, but obviously I don't want to ruin this for the rest of you, so I'm going to continue, like I'll pay the expected amount, that's a really good move.
Okay, so this seems like a very recruiter HR question, but it's from Taylor. I work in the online learning space. We have online workshops on growing professionally and personally. I'm wondering how we can be more intentional about recruiting Black students into our workshops. Any ideas how to show up better to do that?
I think this is a tough one. I think because a lot of this is so subtle, right? Like, and it's one of those chicken and egg problems that it's harder to recruit Black people or people of color to do something when you don't have any people who are people of color doing that sort of thing. So I would think about like, do you have guest speakers? Do you have professors? How do you make it clear that you include diverse voices in the curriculum, and that, I don't know, I'm always more likely, or I'm like paying attention to who is being included in things, like who is being put forth on platforms like this. And I'm definitely going to pay more attention if it's a Black woman or a queer person. I'm like, okay, like that's cool. And I will notice over time if a platform does that again and again. So I think be really aware of who you're putting in front of the cameras, what books you're recommending, what talks you're doing, what you're talking about, and making sure that you're really thinking about that. And then also making sure that your company's values back that up. So what are you doing to create a safe space for the people who are there? And does that look like you have a policy for like a code of conduct of like, you know, or do you moderate comments in a way that allows you to kind of just shut down trolls without further discussion, like having that in place ahead of time so that if something does happen, which is often the case, you can like handle it very quickly because people are paying attention, I think, when that stuff happens, and you might only get one chance to get it right.
That's a really good point. That's a really, really good point. I even think about like different, like being conscientious of different considerations. So something like whenever me and my co-host Eric have received a barrage of interesting messages from time to time for people on the internet, because we have frequently talked about like race on our show, or even just being Black, and that makes many people uncomfortable, as we're finding out now. And so, you know, keeping in mind, like if these events are happening in person, do you have security? Something that we always have to ask for, or do you have specific guidelines for moderating comments for certain events? And to, you know, to Rachel's point, when things happen, do you have like some sort of contingency plan? There's like, I remember doing a panel one time with me and my co-host, and some woman asked a very offensive racial question, and it turns out she had a history of showing up to events and just asking offensive questions, which I was kind of like, did no one notice this before? Like, she's like one of those people who gets paid to cry at funerals. But it's definitely a pattern with this person. But keeping in mind, like, are there going to be, if you're going to be working with somebody, like just asking if they have like certain idea, like what they're comfortable with too. Like, do you have any preferences as far as safety, as far as comment and question moderation? Do you, you know, I remember one time doing it at an event, and they offered me, it was like at a women's something, and they offered like a makeup artist, and they asked if I had any preferences or if I had any specific concerns, which was cool because it was a way of, to me, it felt like they were like, hey, do you want a Black woman? Or like, is there something that's on your mind? And I was able to get a Black makeup artist, and it wasn't a whole thing, but just keeping in mind, I mean, those are all totally just examples from my own life, but there are little considerations like that too. I think that can make
is what really sticks with people and goes a long way.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So building on dealing with hard times, how can we build awareness of mental health into our society? Do you think we're entering a transformative time where our society is moving towards a more compassionate future?
I think so. I think that we're always moving forward. I interviewed somebody last summer for an article that I was writing about bullying, about like what to do if your kid is a bully. And I talked to this education expert who had been teaching like teen boys for 20, 30 years. And he was like, it might not feel like it to you right now, but the gains that have been made in the past 20 years are astonishing. He said, like, each generation gets better. And he was like, but like this generation, like it's growing exponentially right now. And like, don't lose hope, because he was like, you know, the conversations that I see these teenagers having are just like wildly different than they were having even 10 years ago. And so I think about that a lot. And so I think the fact that mental health is something that is now fairly common now, whether it's like understood and whether it's like truly accepted is debatable, and it really depends on the community that you're in. But I think the fact that it's even a conversation that is like fairly mainstream now, and you're going to see the term mental health and like focusing on your mental health a lot of places, the depth of that sort of coverage is up in the air. But I think we've made a lot of gains, and that people are more comfortable saying that they, you know, struggled with depression or anxiety or bipolar. Like, people are talking about this stuff in a really different way than they were before. And I feel good about that. And I feel hopeful about where we're headed, even if it feels slow at times, or it feels like not everyone is totally caught up yet.
Now, this is our last question. This is from Carla. This is an interesting question. How do you build friendships across differences in a genuine way without feeling about tokenism or putting undue work? I think it may be making the friend feel as if they are a token in your life, or putting undue work on them.
Well, I think it kind of starts with, are you just trying to check off a box to say, now I have a Black friend? Like, are you actually connecting with them as a person? Because if you are, I think it actually is a lot easier. Those differences feel less significant when you're just like, I see that they're Black, but I also love XYZ thing about them.
Yeah.
And make sure that you like them as a person and not like, oh my God, this is the first Black person I've met in my small town, so I want to befriend them to feel better. Also make sure that you're giving as much as you're getting. And that's good advice for any friendship, I think. But I think particularly if you're feeling a little anxious or self-conscious, make sure that you are showing up, that you're approaching with an open heart, that you're being genuine. And then I think, do your homework outside of the friendship. If you're feeling like you don't totally understand something or you have questions about something, try not to burden the friend with that stuff, and research it on your own, look into it. You don't necessarily have to, if a friend mentions something, new friend, and you're like, I think that's some kind of reference to like her, something I don't understand about Black hair, then like look it up later. You don't necessarily have to say like, hey, can you give me like a deep dive on like how you style your hair right now? Because you might be too early in the friendship for that conversation. So be willing to just be a little bit, be willing to be curious, but like process it kind of in your own time, I think is good advice. But I think it's also okay to acknowledge the differences and talk about them. And I think just saying like everyone here probably knows, like, I don't see color is not a good place to be. I think that also goes for things like disability and all sorts of things that if you can visibly see something, it doesn't do anyone any good to pretend that you can't. So don't be afraid to acknowledge the things that are obvious and in front of you. If your friend like looks different one day, or you see them using, if their hair looks different, you can say like, oh, your hair looks different today. Looks great. Like you can acknowledge that instead of being like, oh, I hadn't noticed that your hair looks different. So I think just do your best to approach with an open mind and an open heart, and don't stress too much if it doesn't work out. It might not be because of those differences. It might be for other reasons, but this stuff takes time and you'll get more comfortable with it. I think the more you do it, that's true for all of us.
Yeah. It also makes me think, I had a really good conversation over last weekend with one of my best friends since I was like 16 and no, maybe younger, maybe 14, 15. And he's white, and we were we've been friends for a really long time, but our conversation was actually about him, like about some thoughts that he had been having about like his own like cultural identity. And it was it was really nice actually, because it was, how do I put it? He wasn't talking up from a place where he was neutral. I think that sometimes people think about having conversations about like with somebody who's different. I'm not saying like, this is one of my best friends from half my life. I'm not saying if you're making a new Black friend, be like, I'd love to talk with you about the construction of my white identity. Don't do that. Talk about the thing you guys have in common. If it's movies or French fries or whatever, like keep K-dramas, keep it there. But like, I do think that's something that you can do on your own time, and and as you're, maybe as your friendship is developing, again, on your own time and with yourself, is try like start to divorce your idea of your reality and your identity from what is normal or what is neutral, or what is not other, this person is other. And it's like, well, no, you have an identity too.
Totally.
You could be cisgender, you could be straight, you could be white, you could be a citizen. That is just another state of being or another identity. It's not something neutral just because it may be more acceptable or more, I guess, like even shorthand for what goes as mainstream in our society.
Yeah, I agree. I think like being really conscious of your own identity, not to the point where it's like you're bringing that to the conversations and you're bringing that guilt, but I think that's really good advice, Brittany, of just like, none of us are neutral ever. And so that like, it's really helpful to recognize that about yourself. And I think all relationships, that like you're bringing stuff to this, how does that intersect with what they're bringing to it? And like, what does that mean for this friendship?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's all the questions. I know that Politics and Prose has got to pop in. There she is.
Hi. So to wrap up, I wanted to ask each of you a question. First, I want to remind everyone before you go to click the link at the green button to buy Rachel's book, Straight from Politics and Prose. Give it to a friend. But I wanted to ask each of you what you are either currently reading or what you're excited to read next. And for everyone watching, I'm going to send an email to everyone who registered with links to the books that they recommend.
Cool. I am reading The End of Policing, which I have on ebook. I'm reading it on my phone right now, and it is very readable, very good. I highly recommend it if you're paying attention to what's going on. And this is something that I knew a bit about, but needed the deeper dive on. And I'm really enjoying the book. It's upsetting, but also very good.
I have been reading Jubilee. It is by an incredible food writer and recipe writer named Toni Tipton Martin. She's just incredible. It's an incredible Black woman. It's recipes from 2 centuries of African American cooking. So basically, what she did is go through all of these Black cookbooks and find cross-reference recipes and came up with what is her ultimate. And she references cookbooks that are like from Dookie Chase in Louisiana. I mean, in New Orleans, who's basically the queen of Creole cooking, to different like Haitian cookbooks from the 70s to Khaleesi's cookbook, or even cookbooks that are from the late 1800s. That were possibly written by slaves or the very direct descendants of slaves. So yeah, it's a really, really beautiful book that I think really lays bare sort of how contributions of Black people really laid one of the cornerstones for how we think about American cuisine. And I know there's been a lot of brouhaha in the food world, and a lot of people are just now discovering that Black people cook and write about food. But
better than just learning to make banana bread like I've been doing.
Honestly, my dad was making banana bread. He's moved on to zucchini, so you're in good company.
Nice.
Jubilee by Tipton Martin, big fan.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank, of course, Rachel and Brittany. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you to Girls Night In for partnering with us on this one. Happy Juneteenth, everyone. Happy Pride. And stay well and stay well read. And we'll see you next time.
Wonderful.
Bye.
Bye.